Hey there, and welcome to Antioch Conversation Podcast. Today, we've got a special treat. I'm having a conversation with one of the elders at Antioch. His name is Nik Chanda. He's got some great tidbits of information for us today as we talk about biblical community. You're going to hear one thing that his family does on a regular basis to be more intentional about building relationships with people at church. It's something every single one of us can do every single week. So watch out for that. It's a great conversation, and it starts right now.
Welcome to the Antioch Audio Podcast. Today, we're sharing an intentional conversation to help you follow Christ in a life-changing way. Let's jump in.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Antioch Conversations podcast. This is Pastor Andy, and I've got a very special guest, not just a guest, but a special friend, one of the elders at our church, Mr. Nik Chanda. Hey, Nik.
Hey, Andy, thanks for having me.
No problem. Glad you're here. What's fun about hanging out with Nik is we actually have a kind of an ongoing conversation every week. Nik's one of the men that God has placed in my life, and I'm just thankful for him. And we have lots of great conversations, usually around coffee. I don't guess we talk about coffee, but
Sometimes
talk about life and family and faith and our church. And so Nik, God has used Nik to make a big impact on our church, whether you realize that or not. And he's also made a big impact on my life. And so wanted to bring him on the Conversation podcast and let you hear a little more from him, specifically as we talk about the importance of church community. So Nik, why don't you just kind of kick us off by giving us a quick rundown about your family's journey to Georgetown?
Okay, great. Yeah, I think when we stop to talk about community, that's exactly what has driven us here to Texas. Carrie and I were married in 2014. We have two sons, Ethan and Landon. And we knew we were living in the San Francisco Bay Area. We knew for quite a while that was a place that God was moving us from. And when we talk about God moving people, there isn't one exact thing that causes that discomfort. But I think after a long series of prayer, we recognize that God moves people both in our desires and our discomforts.
That's good.
And what we were looking for is an opportunity for our boys to be able to have a living and have opportunities. And in the San Francisco Bay Area right now, the cost of living is so high that even with good incomes, it's very difficult to make ends meet. And frankly, it's very difficult to make community. When you don't have any room in your budget, it's very hard to host people, to be able to, give generously. It's very difficult to do the things that make community.
Yeah.
And we were feeling the oppression and the lack of community. Even though we've had friends for many years in the area, it was really stifling in that. And so God used that discomfort as one of the reasons for us to seek a different place to live, that we could be a part of a real community and contribute to the community.
Yeah. I think what you said, I've never heard you say that before, but that's so good that God moves in our desires and our discomforts. And so, hey, if you're listening and you have some desires in your life that you feel are God-given, or there's a discomfort, those are kind of alarm bells, right? Those aren't things that we should just put away and say, well, we'll just kind of deal with that later. That could very well be God kind of sounding an alarm in your life and calling you towards some sort of action. I know that's the kind of way it was for Aaron and I. When we were kind of serving at a church, we had these desires and we had these discomforts. And so when God opened the door, it was very clear that it was God who was moving. Speaking about opening the door, I remember very vividly in my mind when you and Carrie, Ethan, and Landon walked through the doors of Carver Elementary on a Sunday morning. I remember meeting your family and you coming in. I don't know if you remember this, but you said, we're going back to California and we'll be back in about 3 weeks. And I started kind of a mental time clock. It was about 3 weeks later. I remember kind of watching that door again, like, okay, is that family going to come back? And y'all came back. You came back. Okay. So tell us why. Why did you come back?
Yeah. I think maybe it's important to know, why did we come in the first place?
Yeah.
So, God had moved us all around the country. We were looking for a place to live. and we traveled the country for several months, actually spent a little time in the Dominican Republic. And out of that discomfort, we were offered a friend's home to stay in. They had a vacation home in Salado. Mm-hmm. So we moved back here to the States and moved into Salado, fell in love with Georgetown right away, and decided this was the place God has called us to move to. So normally, if we had planned to move to a city, we would have found a church before we had made a move. That'd be a major part of what neighborhood are we going to live in, is can we have a church that we want to move to? Yeah. But we didn't have that opportunity. So here we are in Georgetown looking for a community, a congregation. Yeah. And we visited several of the local churches, praying every week about the opportunity and making sure that we spent more than 1 week at a congregation. To make sure that there's and God kept moving us. And of all things, he led us to a rental house in Terra Vista, which is the same neighborhood where Carver is located. Right. And Carrie and I looked at each other and said, well, this is a church plant. It may not have all the programs that we're looking for. Yeah. But if we're talking about looking for a community, we must go visit the church that's in our neighborhood. Yeah. We need the opportunity to pray for our neighbors while we go to and from church. Yeah. And so we went and came and met with you, and I knew we only had 1 week to be there before we were going to be gone for a period of time. But I wanted to communicate to you that we're committed to being here, and our neighborhood matters. Yeah. And we're seeking community, and so we let you know. And we were counting the days too on our side, looking forward to come back to church. Yeah. It's so important. I mean, just thinking about the big picture, from California to the Dominican Republic to Salado, Texas. Not a place that probably a lot of people land. A great place to go visit and walk the downtown, and it's kind of a great Saturday spot. But then you ended up in Georgetown, and Georgetown's a big area with lots of booming neighborhoods, and God placed y'all in Terra Vista. Just down the street from where we were not meeting now, but where we met as a new church for the first little over 2 years of ministry. So community was a big deal. So we see that's not an accident. Y'all landed, you came back. There had to have been some reasons, because I also remember in one of our early conversations, you said you were thankful because as you visited all these different churches, one thing that you saw was that the gospel was being preached. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we can easily become very critical of churches, especially churches that might do things a little bit different than us. Mm-hmm. But one thing that you said you saw was that the gospel was being preached, the Bible was being taught in all the churches that you visited. And so that's a good thing, and that is definitely worth celebrating. But there had to have been something else that was sticky, that started to kind of serve as a connecting point for your family. Yeah, for sure. I think they said if we're being in prayer and being in Scripture, we open ourselves up to the influence of the Holy Spirit. Yeah. Right. And as we went from church to church, as you mentioned, I think that there wasn't a message we saw in which the Bible wasn't open, that the Scripture wasn't being preached. Yeah. There was theology at many of the local churches here in Georgetown. When we came to Antioch, obviously we have the same great teaching. One of the things I really appreciate about your teaching, Andy, is that it fills me every week. All of the examples tend to be scriptural examples. There's a real depth of teaching there, and you do it with such ease that it makes it enjoyable. So not only do we enjoy the sermon, you can't see this, but I'm slipping him $100 bill for across the table for those comments. So, just kidding. Yeah. So not only was it enjoyable to sit under the teaching, but we immediately recognized here is a place that everybody is seeking relationship. There wasn't an established, a group of folks who were in the in circle and a group of people who weren't, and how are we going to ever make connection? Yeah. There's a group of people who were living on the mission that was right in front of the door of, leading others to follow Christ in a life-changing way. Yeah. We saw that and felt that with everybody that we interacted with that day. Yeah. We were frankly a little concerned with the junior high program. I have a 13-year-old at the time who's just becoming a man and needing to have somebody other than his father speak Scripture into his life, and we were wondering if that was going to be possible. Yeah. Within the first 2 minutes of walking through the door, Blake came over and introduced himself and invited our boys to jump in right away. And it's been a great relationship there to have the pastoral staff care for our family so much. Yeah. And as we got to know others, we realized, man, we can serve here. It's a place of service. It clearly is creative. There was a different look and feel. We're not in a traditional building. There was signs of creativity and energy that existed when we walked through that door that we wanted to be part of, that we wanted to contribute to.
Yeah. So you talk about there's kind of an affinity group then, and that we often think of affinity groups as, okay, you like baseball, so we can hang out together and talk about baseball. You like football, we can hang out together and talk about football. But probably an affinity group that might be overlooked, that is just shining bright right here in our city, is just the affinity group of new people. And I think sometimes when we're in a place for a while, we start to kind of know what to expect, and we kind of start to find our groove and find our place. But when we're all new, it's kind of everyone is figuring that out together. And that's kind of one of the beauties of being part of a new church, is there's not that history of, well, I don't want to start this ministry, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. Basically, it's a fresh lot, and we get to Christ laid the foundation, but we kind of get to build on that and design it as we go. And so talk more about, because now you're actually one of our elders, and so you went from kind of first time guest about 2 years ago to now entering into a spiritual leadership position in our church. So talk, Nick, about that affinity group of new people, because Georgetown is so fast growing, and we're still seeing so many homes and neighborhoods being built in Southeast Georgetown. How are we as a church going to continue to be a place where new people can connect?
That's a great thought. I think, even over the last 2 years since we've been here, the church has changed some, right? When we were first together, we've seen quite a few new faces come in. But over the last several months, we have some of our best friends are also at church, right? So we went from knowing nobody to having some very deep relationships in a short period of time. And I think that that's a natural transition as the church has been here for a while, that we all start to have familiar faces. And there's a comfort in that familiarity.
Right.
And so there could be a tendency for the church to kind of stop its newness, its commitment to newness.
Yeah.
But the one thing that hasn't changed in Georgetown are the people who are coming. There are new people who are here. And I think if I look at my own experiences with people in my life, when if you've grown up in church or not, there are certain times in our lives that we reconnect to a desire for a deep relationship with Christ. And maybe at a birth of a child, maybe a marker for somebody coming back to Christ.
Yeah.
And maybe through watching a family member's death and going through some hardship or something along those lines. And then the third time is moving. There are a lot of people who have come here who don't have any relationships, human relationships. They've stepped aside from their family and the ability to trust on their provision. And I think that there's a large desire for people to find connection. And we should find connection in church. That should be our number one opportunity. And that affinity of Christ-likeness, of coming alongside to serve Christ, and in so serving one another and serving the community around us, I think was a key attribute that drew us to Antioch in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think it will exist as long as we're growing. And I think we should keep that as a culture.
Yeah. Yeah. So what might be an action step for someone, whether they are part of Antioch or whether they're part of their own church? What's kind of an action step that someone can take just to make sure they're still kind of building community with people that are walking through the doors for the very first time?
I think if we look at, you just said the key word there, if we look at the people who are walking through the door the first time, we know if they're not somebody who's in our friendship circle already, some of the face that we've seen every single week, it's very easy to see somebody who might be coming in the door for the first time. There's a slight hesitancy. The best thing that we have found to do is just introduce ourselves. And that's not always easy. Frankly, our family, we're not extroverts. We are naturally introverts. But we have tried to set that as a discipline, just like we set a scriptural reading as a discipline. And have, just like all those disciplines, the return is so much greater than the effort that it takes to put into it. That simple thing, if we see a new face, don't be afraid to say hi, introduce yourself. We have a built-in easy question here, is how long have you been in Georgetown, or what brought you to Georgetown? It's a very easy question because most people have, it's top of mind. They already have a thought about it.
It's the question that I'm typically asking people, but it's a starter question, but it's also as a pastor, you want to know, once I get to know someone's name, I'll usually ask, how did you hear about us? And so I've heard all different kinds of things of, so and so invited me, or I saw something on Facebook, or I drove by and saw the sign, or I live in Terra Vista and I saw the sandwich boards pointing, and I got curious, and so I've heard all different kinds of answers, but really that's just a starting point for a conversation, and that's what a question is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a starting point for a conversation. So another thing that I see you guys do well beyond just asking questions, and which, let me kind of back up, means you got to take the initiative. I think sometimes we expect, well, if someone wants to get to know me, they'll come and get to know me, when in reality we should be the ones that kind of make that initiation, because as awkward as you might think it is for you, it's just as awkward for them to make the first step. So go ahead and take that first step. So anyway, one thing I see that your family does really well, besides making that initial conversation, is you are constantly having people in your home, inviting people over for lunch, or going out to the park and hanging out with people. What kind of impact has that had on you building community within the church?
Yeah, we really enjoy that. I wish we could do even more of that. It's a perfect opportunity Sunday after church to host a small lunch. We're already together.
Yeah.
And so we've been able to do that. And frankly, if you've been to our home, you've probably eaten the exact same thing, right?
Yeah.
We have a recipe that works well for
Yeah.
feeding a few number of people, but it's really not about the food together. It's the opportunity to sit together.
Yeah.
And I think, there are a lot of New Testament examples of breaking bread together. There's a real truth to that, of spending enough time sharing a meal allows us to have a deeper connection.
Yeah.
And we feel blessed to have people come and be able to spend that time together. But we really enjoy when we see 2 weeks later at church, when two different families who didn't know each other beforehand are now talking because they've made a relationship there.
Yeah.
So it's just an opportunity to facilitate relationship, and for us to get all over that initial hurdle of introductions.
Yeah. I think sometimes we tend to gravitate towards restaurants. What benefit do you see from actually having people in your home versus just saying, hey, let's go meet at this restaurant and eat there?
Well, sure. Well, first of all, we have more time, right?
Right.
We can spend as much time as we're comfortable spending together.
Yeah.
Right. It gives me teaching opportunities for my kids to be able to be hosts, and all those pieces that are integrating our life, our spiritual life and our home life are not two different things. They are the same thing.
Yeah.
And it gives us an opportunity to make sure that we are, in our budget, we have room for making sure that we have time for these things. And it makes what would be a one-time decision part of our spiritual disciplines and our gifts that we have to share.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I love that people know where we are. If they need us in the future and need something, where we live, we have phone numbers, we're here. Yeah. And there's some real benefit to that too.
Yeah. Also, I think there's a personal aspect of having someone in your home. Your home is it is personal. It's one thing to kind of meet someone at a restaurant, but when you have someone into your home, it's kind of like you're peeling back the layers a little bit. Aaron and I also, we love having people in our home, and having two services now at Antioch, and then tearing down. It's often that we're not leaving until about 1 o'clock, but we've made a slight adjustment, and it's kind of worked well for us. And so I share this not to shine light on us, but just to kind of say there's different ways that you can build community and interact with people. We kind of have kind of adopted this bring your own lunch kind of thing. So because we're not home until 1, we don't have that time to prepare a meal, and so we've just asked people, hey, we want to do a picnic with you, but instead of us all kind of going and bringing our own food and meeting at the park, why don't you go grab your own food and meet at our house? And that's kind of a post-COVID world, because again, we've gone to restaurants, and it's, you can't sit down if you've got more than 10 people. And so we love the idea of having people in our home and having that time and having that personal one-on-one connection, and not letting, oh, well, we just don't have enough time to make the food be the excuse for not being with our church family. So anyway, any other thoughts?
Well, just one other hurdle I think that is common for people not wanting others to come over is that my house isn't done or isn't clean enough, and all those things. Yeah. And I think you brought up an illustration a few weeks back in a sermon that, don't look too close to my baseboards because the corners don't match.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we're in the middle of a remodel. Half of our floorboards aren't even done yet, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. That's
Right.
not the focus of that time.
Right.
And it has never come up that somebody's been uncomfortable, even though we know everything's not quite perfect.
Yeah.
But having people together in fellowship makes it perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Nick, for sharing. I'll say this to you, and I'll say this to everyone listen. Nick, you inspire me. When I hang out with you, when I talk with you, it always kind of drives me to be a better follower of Jesus Christ, a better husband to my wife, a better dad to my kids. And again, this is community right here, having these conversations. And so wanted to just kind of share openly this conversation with our church family and anybody else who might be listening, and just kind of challenge you, like, what does biblical community look like for you, specifically because we're kind of living in a time of physical separation, social distancing, whatever it is that you want to call it. But we have to come back and realize that is not the way that God designed us. And so it might look different, but we still need to be with people in some form or fashion, and not just be with people. We need that community. We need to know that there's people who are there for us and that we can depend on. And we need to be able to let other people know, look, I'm here for you. I'm here for you as well. So thanks for sharing your story, Nick.
Thank you.
Hey, here's a kind of quick final 4 round that we kind of ask every guest every week. Tell us, what's a favorite book that you have that you might have recently read?
So I actually just finished. I generally like historical fiction books. I can get myself into a Ken Follett book forever. But of all things, our family started to read R.J. Letourneau's book. It's The Movers of Men and Mountains. R.J. Letourneau, he has a university here, but he's a Christian man who committed his life to Christ early on and was the inventor of big earth movers.
Yeah.
But you can read through, here's an ordinary man who has started a business, who's committed his life to Christ. And you can see not just how it gives him the confidence to take the risks that are necessary to invent something new and big and helpful for society, but his attribution of those things and the peace that comes from making those decisions and the promise that God will provide just rings through his life. And I think he was famous for living off of 10% of his income and giving 90% to God.
Wow.
And it's a really encouraging read in the way that us average people live. It's a way to, live your life in your business, in your work, wherever it is that you are, and commit it to the Lord. And you can see the thread of the peace and prosperity that comes from that. Prosperity.
Yeah. Name of the book again? What is it?
It's R.J. Letourneau's Movers of Men and Mountains.
Movers of Men and Mountains. You have a favorite podcast you listen to?
So I'm kind of a geek on the podcast side of things. So of all things, I listen to artificial intelligence and machine learning podcasts that are really talking about the ethical nature of facial recognition and things like that. And how do we know that these decisions are made for the right reasons? I think that there's all of science, and including this artificial intelligence, that we're not inventing anything. We're recognizing God's created truth. And I think we learn a lot. I actually learned quite a bit about God and creation through the studying of decision-making that's happening through the artificial intelligence side of things. And it's shining lights on ethics, how we are all created equal and we're all created with purpose. And by coming up with the machine replication of some human functions, we can actually learn more about God and the depth of that.
Wow. I like that. I like the outlook on that. Very cool. What do you like to do in your spare time?
So as a family, we're going through the middle of a renovation. I never thought I would enjoy it, but I actually do. I look forward to the projects of building something. I really look forward to it. My sons really enjoy helping. And they're to the point now that I just kind of supervise, and I have a foreman and I have a crew, and they get it all done. So it's good. I get to hand over that responsibility to them.
Very nice. Favorite Bible verse?
I'm a Hebrews guy in general. I love all of Hebrews.
Okay.
The logic and reason just really resonates with me. But of all the verses, Hebrews 3:13 is probably the one that I stick through the most.
Okay.
Basically talking about, day after day, encourage one another as long as it's still called today. I think it's funny. There's some humor in that. As long as today is still called today.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But I think now more than ever, we need to be encouraging one another
Yeah.
in our seeking of Christ likeness through the growing of our gifts.
Yeah.
And the community that we share.
Yeah. So there you have it. Thanks, Nick, for being an encouragement to us. Thank you for your role at Antioch, Georgetown. And thank you for tuning in to today's Antioch Conversations podcast. We'll see you next time.